Hi there, welcome to another episode of the Rabid Dog's House, where we like to discuss lost or forgotten horror gems with a little bit of bite. I'm Justin, and tonight we are going to discuss 1989's Far From Home, directed by Meiert Avis and starring Drew Barrymore, Matt Frewer, Richard Masur, Susan Tyrell, Andras Jones, and Anthony Rapp. Teenager Joleen and her writer father are on the final leg of their summer trip back home. Unfortunately, they run out of gas in a small desert town where residents are turning up murdered. Jolene soon finds distraction between two boys competing for her attention. One wants her love and the other just might want her dead. Far From Home is for the horror fan looking for a fun 80s thriller with a teen angsty Drew Barrymore performance. Also joining me tonight is the fabulous Zena Dixon. Well, thanks again, everybody, for joining us for another episode of the Rabid Dog's House, where we like to discuss lost or forgotten horror gems with a little bit of bite. Hi, Zena Dixon, the real queen of horror. Thank you for joining us tonight. We have the amazing, wonderful, beautiful, talented, amazingly wonderful Zena Dixon. How you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much. How are you?
I am also doing really well. I can't wait to hear your thoughts about Far From Home, which is the film we are discussing tonight. As always, everybody, we're going to be starting off with our non-spoiler reviews, so you will not get bitten. But yes, Far From Home, a movie that I have been watching since I was about 13, a movie that is full of teen angst and thrills, sincereness. But yes, I'm excited to hear what you have to say about it actually, because this movie, I think I was about 12 or 13 when I first saw. So I don't know how I would have felt about this movie if I had seen it any earlier, because it wasn't something I
Mhm.
like grew up with, but it wasn't a movie I saw after the fact either. So I don't know how I would have felt about it otherwise, because for me, it was perfect. It was the perfect time at 13. I think that like this movie was I was the intended audience, somebody who's like 13 to 14, but it is full of teen angst. But also I grew up with Drew Barrymore, from E.T. to Firestarter to Poison Ivy to Scream to Ever After. So it seems like I always caught her right at that same age, which I'm just where I'm a little younger than her. But like we were always at that same point when I saw her movies. And so Drew Barrymore in the desert, scared. Where I of course I was watching this movie, and
Mhm.
again, I think it's a nice, fun, by the numbers thriller. It's not going to be the greatest horror movie all time, the best thriller you ever seen, the most confounding mystery. But sometimes, filet mignon is good, but sometimes you want a cheeseburger and fries, and I feel like that's what Far From Home is. It's gonna satisfy you, provide you with a good solid meal, but it's
Mhm.
not the tastiest thing, but it has a lot of fun moments. Again, it's a sincere horror movie that never quite goes into campiness, but there are those comedic elements. You have like Susan Tyrell in it, who I love. I know her most from Crybaby, which this movie is definitely a precursor to her John Waters experience. And I think she's a lot of fun in this movie, but she gives you that sort of comedic element in a macabre, twisted way. But
Mhm.
I think Drew Barrymore, there is this sort of idea that this movie was borderline exploitative to her. I know that that was a lot of the criticisms out there. I rewatched it again last night to really watch for it. And yes, if you see the original poster for this movie, yeah, I get it. But overall, I think what it is that when you're 12, 13, 14, I think most of us, maybe not all, but most have that idea of like wanting to be a little older and wanting
Mhm.
to maybe explore a little danger, explore our sexuality. And I think that is a true thing. But what I love about this movie and why I don't consider it necessarily to be exploitative is that Jolene learns quite a few lessons. Every time she takes that risk, there's something
Mhm.
to come right back and be like, wait, maybe I'm not ready for this yet. Maybe I'm not there yet, which I think is really a solid message to be giving in a film that is sort of aimed for that 13 to 16-year-old range. So in order to portray, to get to that point, you have to have the point of this girl that is sort of it's wanting to be older, wanting to explore that. And Drew Barrymore at this time was writing Little Girl Lost. I mean, this movie was not her life, but her life was definitely at that time about having to be independent,
Hmm.
exploring with alcohol and drugs, etc. So like young adults do want to have that exploration, but there's also the part that like maybe stay a kid a little bit longer.
Hmm.
Maybe, maybe your dad is right. But I love the authenticity of this movie, the use of voiceover, which people always have like a hit or miss about whether or not voiceover should be used. I like it in this movie. I like it because it gives her an authentic teen voice, but
Yeah.
also because ultimately there's a payoff with it, which we'll get into in the spoilers. But it's also that idea of like an immature kid who doesn't want to be like her dad, who's being exactly like her dad, who's also a writer. So I love that like there's all these kind of things going on. And again, this is written by horror icon Tommy Lee Wallace, who, from playing the iconic moment in the original Halloween where he was Michael Myers in the closet that everybody thinks of, directing Stephen King's 1990 adaptation of It, but screenwriting Halloween 3, directing Halloween 3, Tommy Lee Wallace knows what he's doing in the horror genre, and he
Right.
doesn't always get his just rewards. But it's movies like this that show how what a simple idea he can do and take
Hmm.
it and give you a sincere product. It might not be, again, you look at something like Halloween 3. It's never going to be considered the greatest of the Halloween movies, but in years recent, it's really got a respect now that I think most people have an appreciation for what Halloween 3 is. And that's the kind of
Hmm.
thing Tommy Lee Wallace does. And I think Far From Home fits in that category as well. But again, Far From Home, it has its great performances from Matt Frewer, Susan Tyrell, Jennifer Tilly. I'm always excited to see her, Richard Mazar. So I think it's a fun movie. I think it's not trying to be more than what it is, but I enjoy it for what it is, and I definitely recommend it for anybody that's just looking for a fun little, not mindless piece of entertainment, but something that you don't have to think too hard and can just kind of appreciate for what it's trying to do. But Zena, I believe this was one of your first times or coming back to it with Far From Home. What did you think about it?
Okay, spoiler, I loved it. So, we were kind of talking before we recorded. I realized that okay, I haven't fully watched it, but I remember this used to be on TV a lot when I was a kid, like all the time. So there were certain pieces from the movie that I'm like, oh yeah, yeah. So I was able to like piece some stuff together, but I still didn't know too much what I was in for. I know that there are people who are huge Drew Barrymore fans, and I am, but I know that there are some movies of hers that's a blind spot for me. And I consider this one it, even though I kind of knew of it and I seen bits and pieces, I didn't fully watch it, you know? I don't know why I never watched it as a kid. Not too sure at all, you know? I guess because I didn't know what I was getting myself into. Because think about it, back in with cable, right, in the 90s, and it was just like sometimes you wouldn't have like the little synopsis, just says title, and I'm like, oh, this is a drama. So I would turn it, this is a rom-com or romance, I would turn it. But man, this is such a great Drew, just a great movie in general, but a great Drew exploitation, movie. There's some stuff where it is kind of like, whoa, she was only 14 years old and she's getting like sexualized at such like a young age. But I feel like you explained it perfectly. She is at that age. She's at that weird age where she wants to be older and she doesn't want to be like her dad. And honestly, her dad seemed pretty cool to me. Like they were just in such a terrible situation. Like they had no other choice but to just stay in this like a trailer park area until they're able to find what's going on. And then obviously it's so hot, you could feel that it's hot. Of course he's gonna let her go to the pool. And yeah, my parents are even though I'm grown, my parents are still very strict when it comes to me. But even when I was her age, my dad would have told me the same thing, like, hey, keep this on until you get into the pool. And that makes sense. It's not necessarily about her. It's the people. It's some people around in the area. But I had no idea what I was getting my name or what I was getting into. But when I did see Tommy Lee Wallace, like his name pop up, I was like, I seen that name before, so I had to like check it out. And yeah, I'm a fan of like the Amityville, franchise. I know it gets wonky and crazy, but he wrote the second one, The Possession. And like you said, like Halloween 3 and Fright Night 2, he directed and he wrote. And I love that one. And so it's cool, like, seeing his name pop up. And then, of course, Susan Tyrell, love her so much. I checked out a couple of years ago for the first time Butcher Butcher Nightmare Maker. And that movie, oh my God, it's insane. But she she just has like such a look. She had a look to her, you know what I mean? Where it was just like love seeing her on film. Like she was just made to be on screen, you know? And then you have Jennifer Tilly and just the cast in, oh my gosh, the sheriff, Dick Miller.
Mm,
Yes. He was in everything. Worked with everyone. He was such a talent, you know. RIP. But yeah, just seeing like just the different names pop up. And I know we're gonna talk about Jimmy, but I'm not gonna lie. I think that if I would have saw this as a teen, as a little preteen, listen, I Jimmy has issues, but I love him. But I love him. That's how I would feel. And you know, he's Rick from Nightmare on Elm Street
Nightmare.
4. Yeah,
Yes.
so it's just cool seeing him. And then even with the other kid,
Anthony Rapp.
was
Pinky.
yes. So it's just yes. So it's just seeing them, and it's like I recently just rewatched Adventures in Babysitting.
Yes.
So it just has like such a cast of, you know, full of people that I would have seen on screen, you know. So I say all this because yeah, I remember around the time you've seen this movie. I was just looking at my notes just to make sure. Remember this movie called 13 from the early
Yes.
2000s?
Yes. Yes.
It kind of gave me that vibe because I remember watching 13. I think I was like a preteen. Yeah, I think it was kind of like a preteen, or I was young when, like, you know, I was at that age that Joleen was at, where it's just kind of like you want to be older, but not really. But and then also, you know how like people, or a lot of teens, not all, they go through this thing where they want to like battle their parents, like you're wrong, right? Okay, I don't feel like I went through that phase, and I think that that's because of horror movies. You know what I mean? Where it was just like I found myself I was a scared kid, so I was too scared to really do anything. But I remember
Yeah.
watching 13, and the girl, you know, she started off as like, what's her name? Tracy. She started off as a normal seventh grader, 13-year-old seventh grader, right? And then next thing you know, she just goes down this dark path of drugs and alcohol and smecks and all this stuff. And at 13, you know, stealing, like it was just, it's crazy. It was crazy. So even seeing that, like, because you hear about it, even now as an adult, and that's crazy that a 13-year-old would do that. But you know, imagine being that age. And yeah, I grew up in a city, you know, type of thing, but it's like I didn't know anyone actually who was doing that stuff. No one was really public about it anyway, right? So I say all that because in some ways, Jolene, I feel like it's understandable where she's coming from. So I like the fact that her character does feel authentic because she's curious. And I feel like this whole movie has that vibe where it's like, you know, she wants to listen to what her dad is saying. She knows what the right thing is to do, but she's never come across like two mysterious guys around her same age and they're interested in her.
Exactly. I think she's testing her game. And I think that when you look at movies like 13 or the mid 90s, I think Larry Clark's Kids that show
Hmm.
you these like real intense horror,
Yeah.
this one definitely is wading in the kiddie pool of, exploitation of kids. But I do think that, it goes to show a girl like Jolene. We're about to jump into spoilers, so I won't say too much yet because we're still in non-spoilers. But a girl like Joleen could go down the wrong path really easily. Drew Barrymore went down some dark paths really easily at that age. So I do think there's an authenticity to portraying kids who are some take risks that have unfortunate consequences. So, but with that, we'll get into spoilers now, everybody. Spoilers, spoilers. You have been warned. Spoilers, everybody. But well, I'd love to discuss the performances first, if that works for you, Zena.
Yes.
I think it makes it the easiest way because Drew Barrymore, again, Jolene Cox, I think she effortlessly portrays the nuance of Jolene too, because in a
Hmm.
lot of ways she is Jolene at that time, which I think is what Drew always did well. It's that ability that she has and she always had, which is what made her one of the most memorable child stars of all time, the
Yeah.
ability to kind of infuse herself into a role so that it's sort of the same in a different way charisma that like somebody like Tom Cruise has. You'll watch a Tom Cruise movie, you believe the character he is, but you always kind of see Tom Cruise. Same with Drew Barrymore. You always know it's Drew Barrymore,
Yeah.
but yet she makes this character herself as if Drew Barrymore is experiencing these things. And I think that's
Right.
a real talent. That's a different side of acting. And I think in this role, you see both her and the character she's playing, because I do
Hmm.
think that there's a lot of like comparisons. But like I said, and it really pays off at the end of the movie, which we'll discuss at the ending. I, you get to hear her voice throughout the whole movie with these voiceovers. And like I said, she's constantly rebelling against her writer father, while at the
Hmm.
same time she has her own passion for writing. I love that. It's like a little like trick that I don't even think like, Joleen never really comes to realize about herself, which I love because by the end of the movie, she's had some trauma, but it doesn't seem like she's like forever going to be changed. She's just now going to maybe have a more cautious edge to her, which
Yeah.
is a good thing. We shouldn't just go headlong into everything because our hormones are raging. But yes, Drew Barrymore in this role, she also plays really well that idea of like the overwhelming excitement of having these two different boys, be attracted to her. And I think like, you know, how could that not boost your self-esteem at that age? As a teenager, you are sort of trying to figure out like she's constantly comparing herself when you hear her voiceover to her friend Madeline, I think it is. And she wants to know herself what she can do.
Yeah.
Um, Matt Frewer, though, I think, I'll always know him best from Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, but he's been in so much, and he's played really wackadoo characters like in the miniseries of The Stand, but it's something like that, Trash Can Man or something like that. And he's so out there in it. So he has this ability, whereas I think his portrayal of Charlie Cox in this movie is one of his more straight-laced, like
Mhm.
straightforward roles. I love that, he does well playing this like stressed out dad, but also he's a good dad. Like I
Yeah.
like how he makes sure to do as much as he can for Jolene, like for her
Hmm.
birthday, with very little available.
Right.
The morning of, he's like waking her up. And you see this playful relationship. And Drew Barrymore has always been very honest about like, I've read Little Girl Lost and interviews that she's given where in all of these roles, these father figures that played her father or were directors, she really always was seeking that father figure. And so as sad as that is, it's nice to see she got that in glimpses. And I feel like probably that happened a little bit here, like getting to kind of have your dad playful. It's something she didn't get to experience in real life. So you kind of see why that would be appealing to her there.
Yeah.
And he's the guy to do it. And he does play that really well. But I also like that he really embraces the like true life dad being angry at his daughter for disappearing as soon as he's
Hmm.
realizing too that like this guy she's been talking to is now being suspected of killing his mother. He's furious with her that
Yeah.
she has been wandering off, and I love that moment between them. And this, it's a, I wouldn't say it's one of my favorite scenes, but it's definitely one of the scenes I would demonstrate to show what great performances are in this movie. Is when he pulls her into the trailer that they're staying in, sits her down. You see the like tears in her eyes, the embarrassment she's feeling while
Hmm.
he's feeling the like helpless
Hmm.
dad doesn't know what to do. And I really think the dynamic between them is so believable as father and daughter. And I really love the performances from that. Like I already said, Susan Tyrell as Agnes Reed. I personally think, as much as I love Drew Barrymore and I watched this movie for Drew Barrymore, Susan
Hmm.
Tyrell gives the standout performance of this movie. I
She
mean, it's
does.
over the top in a
Yeah.
way that would serve her, like I said, later in John Waters films like Cry Baby. She's a little off kilter, but like never in a way that tips the movie like too far into campiness. Like it's like a necessary dose of campiness that this movie needs, but
Yeah.
somehow it always stays in reality. You can kind of believe that there's this like over the top woman living out in the desert who's taking like, can I use your phone? $2. Can I have a Coke? $2. Can I get some ice? $1. You believe that this woman is out there and you believe that
Yeah.
she has this very dysfunctional relationship with her kids that give it back though. Like I love it. It's probably horrifying, if you think about it, but when you just watch it for entertainment value, I'm seriously entertained by it.
Yeah.
Like the whole dinner scene where she's like screaming at her daughter, or when she's fighting with her son, but like they're giving it back. And the reason why she's screaming is because she's clearly losing her mind over these fish sticks. So, like
Like
when she's
that made me laugh. Like over
yes,
fish
okay, good.
sticks.
So
Like.
And I think that really comes through. And it's something that I'm always worried about if I show this movie. Like, are people going to be like, what's going on here? But I think it's so funny. And I think it's Tommy Lee Wallace's sense of humor from the script that's being like portrayed by somebody like Susan Tyrell. It
Hmm.
works because you 100% believe he believes that she's this person in this moment. And but I love too, like the little daughter's giving it back right away, who's like just zoned in on the TV, and she like yells right in the daughter's ear. I love this movie from Steele Tyrell, and I won't get into our favorite scenes, but that is one of my favorite scenes. Her death in this film, like it's so again over the top, but like effective.
Hmm.
Yes, you mentioned Andras Jones or Andras Jones, who, yes, I'll always probably think of him first from Nightmare on Elm Street 4, or I don't know, maybe this. But yes, I think he definitely pulls off that like brooding punk guy
Hmm.
that teenage girls would likely fall for.
Yeah.
Nightmare 4, he gets to do a little bit more with like character, but I think he manages to find a real darkness with Jimmy that is
Hmm.
truly believable. And he gives it back to Charlie, Jolene's dad, when like they're in the cop car, and he's calling out Pinky. And when you know how the movie goes, and if you go back to watch it again, you are sort of like, okay, he's a jerk, and he's definitely a jerk, no doubt about it, to Jolene, but you at least kind of know why he's suspicious of Pinky in the end. Like, and seeing his mother, his dad's not around, his mom is Susan Tyrell. You can understand why this kid is like got an attitude problem, and I think he really pulls it off well. And then yes, Anthony Rapp, you said it. I mean, I will first and foremost always think of him as Daryl from Adventures in Babysitting. I mean, that was my movie as a kid that I watched. But I also think of him as from Rent. So I think this is one of those
Um,
really cool roles to see him in because it's not his character in Rent, it's not his character in Adventures in Babysitting, which I do think most people kind of probably think those right away, maybe Dazed and Confused. But like this movie really shows that like what an actor this kid was, and
mhm.
from his like quirkiness, etc. Like I think he's perfectly cast as this shy kid, that is ultimately revealed to have a very, very broken psyche. Both he and Jimmy, though, together reveal the dangerous ways that teenage boys will try to impress girls they like. Jimmy
Yeah.
takes things too far in an attempt to violate Jolene, while Pinky takes it too far by hanging dangerously high from the tower, putting himself in these crazy situations, and then ultimately, like the possessive side of him that he has for Jolene. Richard Mazur as Duckett, always happy to see him. He's one of those actors that I feel like always popped up in everything in the 80s and 90s, and I'm always happy to see him too. He easily slips into this role of like post-Vietnam vet that is just trying to be a good human being. I
Yeah.
like that about him where he's like, I'm happy to watch your car. He's gruff about it. He's like forceful and to make his point, but it's always from a like genuine borderline teddy bear kind of guy. Tender. He's very tender, I think is the word I was thinking of. Especially when you see how he is with Pinky, and the tragedy of that. But like you can see that he's been looking out for this kid.
Yeah.
Jennifer Tilly is Amy. I mean, anything and everything that's Jennifer Tilly, I'm happy to watch. And this is definitely one of her earliest roles, and she's super quirky in it. She's clearly like in her early 20s, but at the same time, she is like barely more mature than Jolene. I like the awkwardness between Amy and Jolene, like when Amy is kind of like forced to babysit her. And Jolene is like, of course, able to totally and believably fool her to get away for a while to sneak off with Jimmy. But like she has this own childlike quality about her. Like when she is sitting with Agnes's daughter, like she sits down and they're both of them. These two characters are like happiest when they're like watching TV. So it makes perfect sense that she just sort of sits down and the little girl offers her like whatever donut or whatever she's eating, and she just like takes it, and start eating it. Like it's a very again, it's for comic relief, but not in an obvious way, but like a way that gives you a little bit of fun in the movie.
I love this cast overall. We have a it's weird. It's a big cast kind of, but I feel like they all have a purpose. So just starting off with, of course, Jolene, Drew Barrymore's character. I really like her. I like that she's curious. Don't get me wrong, she's done some stuff. She did some stuff that's like, what? But teenager. You know what I mean? So yeah, I like that she felt like a real character. I liked her curiosity, but you said this as well that she learned her lesson real quick. She was picking up things and learning. And in some ways, it's like even what I just said to you with Jimmy, like in a way, I get it because it's just like, sometimes you're watching a movie and then they show this character and this person's into them. I'm like, really, why? But with Jimmy, I'm like, oh, okay, I can see the appeal, with that. So going to first, I guess I'll go to Jimmy and then I'll come back to her dad. I like that he was kind of mysterious, you know what I mean? That I guess he, like you said already, he did find her attractive, so he just went for her, you know? And it's like, I'm not too sure. He clearly does have issues because with her attacking her like that, like that was what are you doing? Like clearly there's something wrong with him, because I think that they would have gotten to that point because she seemed like she was open to explore, that kind of thing. So he clearly has issues that's going on, but it makes sense seeing his home life, you know what I mean? And some stuff that he probably went through. And also with his father not in the picture, did your father do something like that? Did you see him do that? You know what I mean? Clearly you found that somewhere, right? Then with her dad, just reflect again, just mirroring what you said. I love that he was just a hands-on dad. Like there was some times when it's just like, hey, maybe don't leave her behind, but I get it. Like he's trying to help people in order to get him and his daughter out of this situation, and he realized like, okay, he knows what age she's at. He knows that she's curious, and she's a very beautiful girl, so he just did his best to protect her. So I love that he was protective, caring dad. I love what he did for her birthday, like you said already. They literally had nothing, but it was still fun. And she was clearly still mad at him. But how can you be mad at that? She's trying to, brooding and writing in her journal. And it's like, you can't be mad anymore. You stop that writing. So, but yeah, I also love the character Duckett. I love that he really did seem that he cared about his community. He did care about Pinky. It was clear as day. So even when what happened to him was just, okay, Pinky, why? But again, there's something going on in that town, you know? And then we touched on Susan Tyrell character Agnes. You mentioned the thing with the fish sticks. That part made me laugh when she just screamed and their face dinner. But it's like you said, you don't feel bad because that's their environment, because the kids are no different. You know what I mean? I don't know if it was like, it's so hard to tell watching. Did she get stuck in that town or this is where she wants to be? I think she wants to be there. I think she's perfectly fine living in the middle of nowhere, charging people $2 for every.
I think you're right. I think you are
Yeah.
right, right, right.
To seeing her. And then the character Pinky, I'm so confused by him because I'm not gonna lie. When all the crazy stuff started to happen and it looks like it's Jimmy, and I said, no, it's not him. It's not him. Because my thing is, it's just like it's kind of what you touched on already. He was trying to prove something, to Joleen. He was trying to impress her, Pinky, right? But in some ways, it's just like I know we'll get into it. I'm confused as to why he did what he did to his mom.
Well, my impression was that his mom died on her own,
And he
and then
just,
he like she died of natural causes, and then so he lost. So it started, which we'll get into it.
oh,
We get into it, but I think it started as
okay.
like survival. Then it became now he's doing it for
Oh,
fun.
got it. See, and that makes sense because I was confused, Like I figured there's a very brief scene where where the dad, he's walking by and you can see his mom just in the background. I'm like, is she? I don't know, but I love that. You know what I mean? Like the layering of it because yeah, she's just watching TV, and
Yeah.
that does make sense. Like that's why we're late. So yeah, I feel like his character is the most interesting, for me because I like that we didn't have too much of him. You know what I mean? But I'm more curious on what was going on in your head, for this stuff. Amy, Jennifer Tilly character, I did like her character, like you touched on already. She did come off like a little kid. I love when she's sitting on the couch with the little girl and she touches the floor and discovers what that is. You know what I mean? Of course, you're gonna go check that out, But I'm also thinking, like, that happened at night, her mom, right? And the little girl never thought to like check in on, but then again, it makes sense because her mom would just screamed in her face dinner time. So she probably didn't want her mom in her face, you know what I mean? Asking her any questions. And she seemed perfectly fine when her mom was taken away. She wanted to stop the ice cream. So I don't know. It just seems like there was something wrong with like the family as a whole, if I'm being honest.
Dysfunction on a whole nother level.
Yeah, but yeah, I love the cast. Oh, and then the sheriff Bill Childers, I don't remember, but the sheriff of the town. I just like the character. I just like the actor. You know what I mean? So I just have to mention him. And like you said, he was literally in everything. So whenever I see him on screen, it was exciting. And I did want to say, with one character, Duckett, he was also in It. So it's cool seeing him in It. He was in,
Yes. Yes, I don't think I
yeah,
realized that. I know he's in it. I know he's in this, but it did
yeah,
not,
he was
just
in
blew my
everything.
mind.
Like what's the other one? The Thing, Risky Business, The Believers, because I recently watched The Believers for the first time, which is an amazing like horror voodoo okay, anyway, point is that's a rabbit hole. But yeah, I just I always like seeing him on screen. But yeah, overall, like the cast, it's again, it's kind of a big cast, but I feel like everyone has their purpose and they just fit.
Well, and it's funny because I think Richard Mazur looks like Tommy Lee Wallace too. So there's this weird level of something going on there. So that's pretty interesting. So as we just get into our favorite scenes here, I'll say, right away, I love the intro. I love showing that we are in the desert, which overall sets up the isolation that we as the audience are going to feel alongside the characters in this very dry climate. Watching this movie does make me very thirsty. Even talking about it kind of makes me thirsty.
Yes.
And I love the little POV shots we get right away, as Jolene and her dad arrive in town with a little like remote control car, right up through to the convenience store. It is an unexpected shock when Jolene finds the body, which
Hmm.
I think sets the right tone because it's easy enough for everybody to move on. We all
Yeah.
think, I mean, we don't as the audience because we know we're about to watch a thriller horror movie here.
Mm.
But, for the characters, I think it's perfect setup that like it appears to be for the characters this isolated incident, convenience stores get robbed, so it seems like an isolated incident that anybody would hear about. And I think it's believable. The sheriff of the small town is like talking to the dad. He's not thinking too much about Jolene. So I think it is easy for her to kind of walk around and find this body that I think like everybody assumes was killed by a drifter that is now long gone. So I really like the setup of it. I feel like it's simple, right to the point. Like I said, the whole sequence with Susan and Tyrell and her kids. I probably won't go all the way through it again, but just again, everything about it. She cracks me up. I mean, she is clearly a horrifying mother. But like I said, I love that the kids give it back to her. Dinner time, But you were kind of talking about the daughter. Yeah, I think that it's both things. I think the daughter about why she didn't go up is exactly what you said. I think the mom had yelled at her the night before, but also as we've seen, this girl is very oblivious. All she cares about is the TV, even if, like you said, her mother was being, she finds out about her mother. She's just worried, where are we going? Am I going to get ice cream? Is there going to be a TV? And it's because of the dysfunction of this family,
Yeah.
which is each member is affected. Um, the other scene I really love is the rescue by Pinky. So I was relieved. Like that scene, it's just enough to make your stomach feel uncomfortable, but it doesn't last too long. And I was relieved when Pinky rescues Jolene by the lake. But I also love that they like kind of help each other. So yes, he saves Jolene, but she saves Pinky right back, because Andras Jones does have that presence that you could believe he's stronger than both of them. And
Mhm.
that Pinky would probably get crap beaten out of him. So I like that Jolene kind of had to step in. That's what I like about that scene, which then leads to the abandoned structure. And we kind of talked about this in our last episode that, I always love to see things like that. If I had seen something like that, I would have 100% gone into it, pretended I was in a horror movie, running around, hiding. So just again, seeing it at that young age, I'm like, totally makes sense. I would be there. And I think that it is the kind of place that kids would kind of hang out and sort of graffiti or
Mhm.
bring their little collected items there and stuff. And so I just really, every scene there, I think, makes it just a little bit more believable from the teen aspect. Teens watching this, I think, would get it and understand it. And again, I would have had loved to have had a spot like Pinky's there. My other favorite sequence is the exploding car. It's the whole buildup of that, like the dread. that's building. You know something's going to happen. You're not completely sure how it's going to play out, who's going to be hurt. There's the building tension as Joleen loses her journal while Amy's
Mhm.
in the car. You see the little remote control car with a little candle, whatever's in it. And, it's a really tense moment. And it's really sad. Like, it's not sad enough to make you feel bleak about this movie, but it is
Right.
sad because Jennifer Tilly's Amy is such a likable character in this. I think that, like, it's unfortunately the right character that's going to have the most impact of, like, oh, this is so bad. And I love, like, the final shot of that scene with Drew Barrymore as the flames are, like, playing out of her eyes and everything like that. So those are my overall, like, favorite scenes. And then we'll get obviously the ending too, which we'll talk about. But Zena, what are some of your favorite scenes?
Honestly, I like you. I really love the opening. I feel like it kind of like sets the tone. You can feel the heat. You could feel that she is dealing with the teen angst because her dad's not doing anything. He's just driving. And you had a horrible time from camping? Okay, well, good thing you're going back home, because come on. But anyway, no, I like that start of it. I love also movies. I don't know if I ever told you this before. I love movies that features journals. You know what I mean? And it's fitting that she was like doing like a voiceover because that's her writing and it kind of like has like a cool vibe to it. And then again, it's like she has her own little style, to her. And I meant to mention this before when we were talking about her wearing like her three watches, she's just discovering herself. So that's the vibe that I was getting, that while her dad's trying to find out about, the gas, and then she sees this little car that comes up to her and, because it's pretty weird. And then who knows, not who knows, but then she sees like the love of her life, supposedly, maybe, at one point. Then he disappears. Like, oh, that's supernatural. I was hoping that he was a ghost, but he wasn't a ghost. So yeah, I really do like the opening. I love that scene too, where Pinky saves her. Well, they actually saved each other. You know what I mean? Because it's like that meant that he knew what Jimmy was up to. So the fact that he followed them there, and I'm so glad that he did, because like you said, it could have been far worse. It's still uncomfortable to watch, but it happened so fast. And then it's more of them to like, almost beating Jimmy up than anything, than her actual attack. So there's that one. And I do love that scene as well that you touched on with the car, when she's looking for her journal, and you can just feel the buildup of it all. And I love the fact that she was just said to her dad, like, hey, I'm not going anywhere without it. And so she's going to go look back, and then like you said, like the car that is driving towards it with the fire, and it's just like, oh no. And I'm so happy that nothing happened to her dad, because I thought that something was going to happen because he was so close, to the car. Unfortunately, Amy, Jennifer Tilly's character, like I really did like her, so it was, sad to see that. But it was like they did have to get away, and they did try to save her, and she was probably in a panic, which she was probably locked in, and she couldn't get out, unfortunately. But yeah, it's a horrible scene. And the other scene, I love the scene when we find out that Pinky's mom is no longer living. Like he had her propped up in plastic just to make it look like she's just sitting back and watching TV. So yeah, that
That's
because that's
chilling.
right. And it's like, again, didn't even really feel like it was going to head in that direction. Like even with what happened to Susan well, Agnes's character, it's like, oh man, in the nights when just tossed in the toaster while she's in the bed. Like it's funny, but it's not funny, like who would do that, right? But then it just keeps on getting worse, and kind of like what you said, like when Joleen discovers the dead body in the convenience store, it's like, oh yeah, robberies happen all the time, when it's just like, man, there is a psychopath that is loose in the town. So yeah, I like how there's like little things that's happening, every now and then.
All right, well, now we'll get into the ending, but I think that's a perfect segue because, again, it's I think the main theme, one of the main themes of this movie, it's about kids having to grow up too fast, but
Yeah.
still being kids.
Hmm.
And when you think about things like who would do that, who would throw the toaster in, of course it would be a kid, a
Yeah.
demented kid, but it's so like juvenile, like, oh, and it's what makes this movie work, I think, on a lot of levels when you go back to watch it is it was a kid doing this. I think a lot of horror movies, especially at this time, would get the sort of flack of like, oh, it's ridiculous or it's ridiculous. In this way, the ridiculousness works because it's a kid doing it. He's a young teen, that's what works about it. And I think that really fits with the overall theme. So it's about kids being kids. And like you just said, we find out that Pinky's mom has, I believe that she died, and that's what then set this off. Again, I think it's like, you could find a way of looking at it. I think though that did he snap and maybe did, hurt
Hmm.
his mom and it just started going. But I do think that it started for Pinky as he didn't know what to do and he panicked because he's a kid.
Yeah.
And then he, like Duckett ends up kind of giving in the denouement that, he didn't know what to do. So he went to the convenience store for food. He needed food. He didn't have the money to pay, so he killed the guy. Agnes was hounding him for rent. He doesn't have the money. He killed her though. It's another way to make the rent go away. In kid mind with, an infantile or childish way of thinking. Like again, that's not going to ever long term solve these problems. It's going to make way more problems. But from his perspective, short term, we just need to fix the short term. And at this point in the film, we now know that Pinky's a killer. He stabs Duckett. He explains, he's like, you shouldn't have come in here. And that chilling moment when you see like Duckett on the floor having been stabbed, and Joleen had come in, and you're like, oh, if she goes back there, what's going to happen? But Pinky takes her out, and you see Duckett laying there, and they just kind of walk by. I love that moment. But they end up at the cement building abandoned structure. And at this point, we know that Pinky is already a killer. But at the same time, he is again shown to just be a kid, not ready for adult themes. Which is because, Jolene is trying to like kiss him and try and like spark that
Yeah.
thing, which I think again shows what a kid she is, because the day before she was enamored of Jimmy and liked Pinky, but enamored. But now she's like, well, maybe I'm supposed to like Pinky. He's the good guy. It's
Yeah.
it's a very again kids having that short term or the very stereotypical broad strokes, however you want to say it, that like, oh, I'm going for the bad guy. Oh, he is bad. So I should go for the
Hmm.
good guy now, not really wondering how you really feel about this person you just met. Only a teen is going to be like that.
Right.
And I think this was a big thing in the 80s and 90s, the idea of like kids having to struggle with adult themes and kind of getting lost in the shuffle. You
Hmm.
know, Jolene is struggling with growing up throughout the movie, and each time she's presented with an adult situation, she ultimately realizes that maybe it is better to not grow up too fast. Pinky, however, he's forced to become an adult due to his mom's death. Pinky is ultimately doing everything out of desperation in a misguided attempt to survive. But I think it becomes, subtext that Pinky does start to like it, which is
Yeah.
kind of terrifying. It started as survival, but
Hmm.
but murder, it becomes a slippery slope, right? I think for him it does, and he starts to enjoy it. Like, you can maybe, argue about it's for food, so he had to kill this guy or shelter. But he then did blow up the car. I think he got a pleasure out of that.
Yeah.
And like the sheriff, he ends up killing the sheriff for no reason. And
Hmm.
it becomes like he's sort of realizing, or the two worlds collide, that he's sort of like, okay, food is survival, shelter is survival, maybe loneliness is, not being alone is survival. So he's sort of like, well, killing has now solved these other problems. Maybe
Hmm.
it'll solve my problem of loneliness, which is then why he goes after Jolene. And
Yeah.
it's again now because he's now starting to like it. I think he's been powerless as a kid. It's his one way to get power, and he wants to keep Jolene with him. And like I said, he kills the sheriff out of pleasure. Or I'm sorry, he does have a perverse pleasure in reading Jolene's journal. I think he felt embarrassed that she was kissing him, and she didn't make fun of him or anything, but I
Yeah.
think he felt embarrassed, so he wanted to now embarrass her with the journal. Like he pulled out to show the knife, but he's holding
Yeah.
the journal. I don't think it was like I think it was, whether you want to be Freudian about it, maybe he subconsciously did it, but I think he did it to embarrass her.
Yeah. Me
And
too.
again, this is what I was talking about with the payoff of the voiceover. Not only
Hmm.
does it, yes, give her this voice, I love that it's always an authentic teen voice too. It feels like a teen. It doesn't feel like an adult, even though Tommy Lee Wallace is an adult writing for a teen. It does seem like a teen is saying all this stuff. But it is a violation. Jimmy tried to violate her physically. Pinky violates her emotionally. I think he intended to kill Jolene, but in a sad, tragic twist, he really did love her. So,
Yeah.
I think he realized the horror now of what he had done and realized like there's nothing else he can do. So again, like I always love a good great cat and mouse chase sequence. I don't think it's the best chase sequence ever, but it's there and I'm pleased with it. And with Pinky's pursuit of Jolene, Jolene's dad is trying to come in and help her. It really does become between Jolene and Pinky, but when he gets shot and slips, he does actively choose to let go. And in a very childish way, he gives her, I don't mean childish like insultingly in this instance. I mean, in a beautifully childish way, he gives her that patch, knowing like he's messed up. So even as a kid, all the kids in this movie are learning now, whereas Jolene and Pinky are trying to be somebody that they're not and realizing it's not going to work. I do think that Jimmy's character, as we see in the end as he's walking, he's the one kid that did come from kind of a junk family. Jimmy is the one who doesn't really learn a lesson. He's the one who was genuinely always himself with this dark, brooding teenness, but
Hmm.
that's also who he is because of his how he grew up. With Pinky and Jolene, it's really sad because they both were trying to be somebody that they weren't, and in doing so, put themselves in harm's way, and it leads to this tragic end. But I think again, it's an effective movie by the numbers. It's not going to leave you blown away, but I think it's a great, entertaining movie that has this really great subtext to it. But what did you think of the ending, Zena?
Oh man, I felt like it was a satisfying ending for me. A lot of doors were closed. When Pinky, it was revealed that he's the killer. Like I stated earlier, I kind of figured that it was. I just wasn't too sure what his motive was. But then the reveal of, just his mom, and then even with you saying that, where it does make a lot of sense. I think that he panicked and he didn't know what to do. He probably didn't want to be taken away from his little small town or from his home, and so he just wanted things just to remain the same. Like technically probably his mom would never really talk to anyone anyway. You know what I mean? So who's going to know? So all he would have to do is just do certain things. And honestly, I don't think that people would have suspected him because Jimmy, you know what I mean? Like he was known for doing some stuff already. So that's what came to mind with that. I did feel bad for him because it's just kind of like you said, it went from a survival type of thing to you just actually beginning to love it. And I don't
Yeah.
feel like he started it because it was his fault. I think that he accidentally fell into this routine. Whereas, like you said with Jolene, with her parents, they're divorced, but clearly there's love there. She's clean, she's fed, you know what I mean? She has that teen angst because what else are you going to complain about? You know what I mean? Jimmy was just wondering, probably wondering what his life is going to be in like 10 years. Pinky, what's he going to do for food? You know what I mean? She didn't really have like real problems, like real
Right.
life problems, right?
Right.
So, yeah, it did seem like she was trying to be something that she wasn't, but I feel like she learned really quick. And it kind of was so terrifying to see Pinky murder the sheriff because he just did it like it was like turning a page. You know what I mean? Like it was like a second nature for him, like unapologetic. And then he just, it happened. He wasn't shocked. He wasn't like, oh no. It was like, and these are people that he's been around too. Like when you really think about it, he's probably been around them his whole life and you didn't really have any type of remorse for it? So I think that it was really sad when he did when he fell and he decided to let go. But I think that he probably felt that he had no other choice but to do that. He's probably never going to see Jolene again. He's probably going to have to leave the town. He'll probably have to go to jail or juvie, or he'll be away. So him letting go, I think it felt like it was his way out. And then even when it came to like Jimmy, you could tell that he was just angry. And he in general, he's just an angry person. You could see that. And I don't feel like I know he's not a real person, but guarantee he's probably not he's he wouldn't have stopped with Jolene attacking Jolene. You get what I'm saying? Like, unfortunately. But yeah, I really enjoyed the ending. It was like a lot of, close chapters. Even when it comes to Charlie, he never gave up on trying to find his daughter. He went in screaming, looking for her, and then they got out of there as they should. And I love the fact that she was sitting in the front seat instead of the back seat, like you're being held
Mm-hmm.
hostage. So I do feel like, don't get me wrong, she's still going to be a teen, but I think that she learned her lesson, kind of like what you said. I think that she'll be more selective on some things and cautious. So I really did, I enjoyed it. And it felt like a good ending. Like, how sometimes it's like, oh, there's enough for a sequel. There's no more room. The book is closed.
Stories told. I like you said something in there that I think is really illustrated by the final like dialogue. You said she's still a teen, but she's learned something, but she's still a teen. And I think that's really encapsulated with the last lines. You almost think that it's going to be wrapped up with like some profound thoughts from Joleen, but
Right.
she's basically still bitching about her dad. But I do like that that's the focus of it, though, because she's
Yeah.
basically, as much as she can as a teen who's just suffered a lot of trauma, being like, he was right more than he was wrong.
Yeah.
But again, it's still showing that like she's going to survive this and
Hmm.
hopefully she's learned some lessons and will make some wiser choices now.
Right.
She's still a teen. And I think that's the overall essence of this movie, or I think why people at the time particularly had like this reaction to it was like not expecting this age group because they're not 17-year-olds, 18-year-old
Hmm.
campers in Friday the 13th land. These are just
Right.
young adult teens. And
Hmm.
I do think that what's scary about it is that I do think they exist. Like you said about Jimmy, I think that these people do exist. But overall, I think Far From Home is one of those movies that, it's just meant to be entertainment. It's just meant to be fun. If you love a good Drew Barrymore performance, you're gonna enjoy this. But like you said, and I agree completely, it has this amazing cast that there's a lot of people in it, but it doesn't feel like overwhelming. And I feel like everybody kind of gets their fair share. But it also has some interesting, unique kills, some
Yeah.
really out there funny moments. But overall, I think it's an effective thriller. Well, thanks again, everybody, for joining us for another episode of the Rabid Dog's House. What is your favorite Drew Barrymore movie? Are you a fan from Far From Home? Thank you, Zena Dixon, the Real Queen of Horror, for joining us tonight. As always, you can find Zena over at realqueenofhorror.com, on YouTube under her Real Queen of Horror moniker, or over at Wicked Horror. And I'm Justin. You can also find me at Wicked Horror, Horror One Pop Culture, or over on Blue Sky. All the links below. Thank you, Zena, for giving Far From Home a chance. I'm really glad we got to discuss it. I had a blast.
Yes, thank you so much. Like I still so happy to have this a part of my collection. So thank you for picking this one. I really again really enjoyed it. I wish I would have checked it out as a kid because I think that I would have been like blown away. Still blown away though.
I wish they would do a Blu-ray release of it already, though. I'm ready for that. I think the DVD was all I could find, but I'll take what I can get for now. But I'm so glad you enjoyed it. And thanks again, everybody. We'll talk to you next time.